Welcome back to Things You Don't Know. Walk into almost any American courtroom, and one piece of clothing immediately identifies the judge: a plain black robe. But that raises two questions. American law inherited a great deal from England, where judges traditionally wore elaborate robes and wigs. So, why did Americans keep the robe but lose the wig? Hmm. And why did we settle on almost universal black when judges in some other countries wear different colors according to their court office or the kind of case they're hearing?
Because if we inherit a courtroom, the common law, much of the terminology, and the robe, dropping the wig seems oddly selective.
Well, Chandler, we shouldn't assume that anybody sat down after the Revolution and suddenly designed a new American judicial uniform. What happened and what developed was a mixture of English inheritance, changing fashion, Republican culture, and eventually tradition. Judicial robes long predate the United States. English judges had worn distinctive court clothing for centuries, and by the 17th century there were detailed conventions covering what robes judges wore and when they wore them. Those robes were not always black. Scarlet, violet, black, fur trim, different facing. Court dress, it was called, could indicate the occasion, the judicial office, and eventually the type of proceeding.
So the Americans didn't invent the idea that judges ought to dress differently from everyone else in the courtroom.
No, we
Right, Dr.
didn't.
Dineen?
No, we did not at all. Colonial America imported that custom along with English law. In colonial Virginia, for example, members of the upper house, the governor's council, could put on robes and wigs when they sat as judges of the so called general court.
Whoa, that really sounds so weird, doesn't it,
Yeah,
today?
yeah, politicians sitting in judges, like in the UK, until very recently, they didn't have a Supreme Court. They had what's called the House of Lords, and all these lords would act as judges. The guy could have been a bank president, but you put him in that building, he's all of a sudden a judge.
Yeah. And the robe served a useful purpose beyond decoration. It visually separated the judicial office from the individual holding it. Once the judge put on the robe, at least symbolically, the person became a representative of the court.
Now, Dr. Weaver, that's the part that I find more interesting. If robes communicated authority, then wigs did too. Why keep one and just abandon the other one? I don't understand.
Well, because the wig wasn't originally a uniquely judicial symbol, wigs became fashionable among European elites in the 17th and 18th century, partially because they didn't wash their hair very often.
Hmm.
Judges adopted them because respectable men of their class, and remember, everything in the UK is class, were wearing them. The British judiciary itself notes that wigs and robes became a part of court dress after being fashionable clothing in polite society.
And that's an important distinction. The robe had an obvious institutional function. The wig was much more closely connected to a particular person of elite fashion.
Now, I think politics matter too here. The new United States was trying to establish a republic after overthrowing the monarchy. Elaborate powdered wigs and scarlet, fur trimmed robes that looked like the social hierarchy Americans had supposedly rejected.
You're right to a point, Chandler, but I would be a little cautious there. That's certainly plausible, but it isn't exactly a neat story in which Americans suddenly declared, "We're a republic now, throw away the doggone wigs." Some colonial judges certainly wore them, and the older styles didn't disappear overnight.
Yeah, I do agree with you. It's better to say that wigs lost their place as ordinary elite fashion, while American public institutions were also visually less aristocratic. Now, those trends reinforced one another. George Washington is a useful reminder of how transitional the period was. People often think he wore a wig, but he actually wore his own hair, powdered and tied back. I think that's just kind of amazing, don't?
It is. It would almost seem Native American in some ways, but when you think about
Oh,
it,
I never thought about it that way, but you're right. Whoa, whoa. Okay. And here's another surprise. The first Supreme Court justices didn't necessarily look like modern justices. Chief Justice John Jay wore a robe with red and white decoration, reflecting older English and colonial traditions. The Supreme Court still notes that Jay and apparently some of his colleagues brought considerably more color to the early court than we see today.
So the plain black robe wasn't there fully formed from day one, huh?
you're quite correct, Chandler. The turning point is usually associated with John Marshall, who became Chief Justice in 1801. Marshall appeared in a plain black robe while the other justices were still wearing more colorful attire. His colleagues soon followed the simpler style. The Federal Judicial Center identifies that transition as the origin of the black robe tradition that dominates federal and most state courts today. There's a wonderful website called Judiciaries Worldwide. Check that out if you want to know more.
And that sounds very Republican to me, Dr. Dineen. Get rid of the scarlet fur, elaborate decoration, and visual distinctions. Everybody on the court wears the same plain black robe.
I think you're basically right, but again, intent is harder to prove than outcome.
Yeah, you know, Marshall's robe is often described as representing Republican simplicity, and the Virginia Museum of History and Culture makes that connection. But historians have also warned against turning Marshall into the single inventor of the black robe. Elements of the transition may have begun even earlier.
But why did black become so successful? Why not blue robes for federal judges, red robes for Supreme Court justices, and some other color for state judges?
Well, I think that's because once plain black became established, it communicated several things very effectively. It was formal without being elaborate. It concealed differences in ordinary clothing, like you couldn't tell if somebody had a lot of money and wore a fashion design suit or something. And over time, Americans came to associate it with judicial seriousness and impartiality. The Supreme Court itself says robes are traditionally understood as bringing dignity and solemnity to judicial proceedings.
That makes sense, Dr. Weaver. I'd separate the history from later symbolism, though. We often say that black represents equality or neutrality, but that doesn't necessarily mean those ideas caused the judges to choose black in the first place.
That's fair. The tradition can acquire meanings after it begins.
Exactly. And once thousands of judges wear essentially the same thing, uniformity becomes part of the message. A federal district judge and a Supreme Court justice may exercise very different authority, but their clothing doesn't announce a social rank.
That differs sharply from some other judicial systems that preserved more elaborate court dress. In England and Wales, for example, dress can vary according to judicial office and the kind of case being heard. The kind of case. A circuit judge sitting in the Crown Court traditionally wears a violet robe with lilac facings, a red tippet, and in appropriate proceedings, a short wig. Higher judges have had other forms of court dress.
Although Britain has simplified things too. Judges in many civil and family proceedings no longer wear wigs, and modern civil robes are less elaborate than older court dress.
And the UK isn't the only alternative. Germany provides another interesting example. Most German judges wear black, but the judges of the Federal Constitutional Court wear distinctive scarlet robes and caps, adopted in 1962 to distinguish West German judges from the Nazi past and also the communist East Germans, as well as to distinguish that court from the ordinary judiciary.
So we shouldn't say foreign judges universally wear colors according to rank. Judicial clothing varies enormously, but some countries use clothing to identify distinctions that American judicial dress generally leaves invisible.
Well, I'm going to push the argument even further here. I think
Uh-oh.
the Oh yeah. I think the American system sends a deliberately democratic message. A judge is a judge. The authority comes from the office and the law, not from scarlet cloth, not from gold trim, or not from a different costume indicating that this judge outranks another judge.
The argument makes sense, though I'm not totally convinced. Courts themselves are hierarchical. A Supreme Court justice plainly has different authority from a local trial judge. Dressing them alike doesn't eliminate that hierarchy.
No, it doesn't, but it chooses not to display it on their clothing, though.
Yeah, I think that that is the stronger point, uh, Chandler. And yes, you're right. The American judiciary has ranks and levels, but the robe generally doesn't advertise them. The visual emphasis is on membership in the judiciary rather than position within an elaborate judicial hierarchy. And interestingly, there is no single national rule requiring every American judge to wear exactly the same robe. Much of this remarkable uniformity exists because of tradition rather than one centralized dress code. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor pointed out that even Supreme Court justices have no prescribed source or detailed uniform governing their robes.
She made a joke one time at a gridiron dinner that she was going to come into the court in go go boots just to see how
Oh,
people were going to react.
oh, wow. That would have been
Wow.
hilarious.
Yes.
Since the late justice was a little on the conservative side, I think that would have caused a little trepidation, but I don't think the other members would have minded. We'll never know. But the reason we kept the robe and not the wig, we've given some of the main reasons, but the two pieces of clothing follow different historical paths. The robe remained useful as a judicial office, a symbol of that office. The wig was more dependent on a particular era of fashion and social convention.
You're basically saying that the robe is the symbol of the judicial office. The wig was dressing it up and bowing to social fashion at the time. Is that what you're basically saying?
Very well put, Dr. Weaver. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Yes.
Yeah, and the simpler black robe, to add to that, Dr. Weaver, well, it fit the political culture of the early republic better than the elaborate visual hierarchy of British court dress.
Well said. As long as we keep the historical qualification, nobody can point to one law or one meeting where America officially made that choice. It just kind of evolved. The United States inherited English judicial ceremony, simplified it, and eventually turned one part of it, the plain black robe, into an American tradition of its own.
Meanwhile, other countries preserved or developed systems where the judicial clothing communicates more information about office, court, or proceeding. Very briefly, I was in Ottawa, Canada many years ago, and their judges wear black in ordinary provincial courts, but red in federal and in the Supreme Court, and the Chief Justice wears a little blue stripe across his red robe, which looked like something out of Star Wars, but I have to say I was very impressed.
That sounds pretty interesting, Dr. Dineen. And the clothing tells us something about the legal culture. Britain preserved more visual distinctions, but America largely chose uniformity.
And that gives us the answer to the question we started with. America kept the robe because it remained a powerful symbol of the court. It abandoned the wig as the fashion and culture that supported it faded. And the plain black robe survived because simplicity itself became part of the American judicial image. You've been listening to Things You Don't Know. We thank you very much for joining us, and hopefully, we'll see you again soon for another quick and quirky look at the history behind something we see all the time but rarely stop to question.
Yeah, and be
Come,
sure to leave a like and comment and tell us some of the quick histories you might like for us to explore and give us a subscription. Bye
lots of
for
fun
now.
stuff coming up, folks. Bye bye.